The sky was burning. Smoke covered the ground. Ashes floated in the air like dead snowflakes. The war had ended, but not in peace. It had ended in fire. In screams, in silence, Corporal Jake Marin moved slowly through the battlefield. His armor was cracked, one eye swollen shut. He had a bleeding cut on his forehead. But he was alive, barely. He looked around the empty field. The alien soldiers were all gone. His team was scattered, some dead, some missing. The battle was lost on both sides, and he had no orders, no signal, no mission anymore. All he had was a burning pain in his leg and a broken rifle. He was about to sit down near a burnt-out transport ship when he heard it. A soft sound, so faint that it could have been the wind. But it wasn't. He turned slowly. There, lying half buried in the ash, was something that moved. A small shape, bare arms, thin fingers twitching. He limped over, unsure if it was a dying animal or a trap. But as he got closer, he froze. It was an alien girl, young, maybe a teen. Her skin was pale purple, with blood marks and burns. Her face was bruised, and both her legs looked broken. She wasn't moving much. Just breathing, barely alive. Jake raised his weapon. He should have pulled the trigger. She was the enemy, or at least that's what the command would say. But something about her stopped him. Her eyes opened slowly, golden and wide, full of fear and pain. She didn't speak, didn't beg, just stared. Jake looked around. No cameras, no drones, no officers to judge him. He lowered his weapon. He knelt beside her. The girl flinched, but didn't cry, didn't speak a word. She had probably accepted death already. Jake didn't know why he did it. But he took off his jacket and covered her thin body. She was shaking from the cold. Even in the ash, she was cold. "You're not gonna die out here," Jake whispered. "You're not the enemy anymore." He pulled her up slowly. She was light to light. Her body was weak and fragile. He held her in both arms and started walking. There was a small shelter not far from there. It had been used by medics during the early part of the war. He remembered it from an earlier mission. He hoped it was still standing. Each step was pain. His leg felt like it was on fire, but he didn't. "Stop." She clung to his chest weakly, breathing slow. Her eyes stayed open, watching him. The shelter was still there, broken, burned, but standing. Jake kicked open the door and carried her inside. He laid her down gently on the cleaner side of the floor, then searched for supplies. Most of the medicine was gone, but he found water. He poured some into a cup and helped her drink. She drank slowly. Like she hadn't tasted water in days. He gave her some dry food next. She didn't eat much, but she tried. She didn't speak at all, not even a thank you. But he didn't expect it. Jake sat down beside her. He looked at her again. Thin arms, dirty face, bloody feet, and yet something strange, not human, but not a monster either. Just a girl, a broken girl. Outside, the wind howled through the dead battlefield. Inside, it was quiet. Jake leaned his head back and closed his eyes. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for tonight, he had made a choice. He would protect her. Even if no one else would. Even if she never said a word. Even if she didn't survive the night, he wouldn't leave her alone. Because sometimes, being human means staying. When everyone else walks away, and in the silence of war's end. One soldier and one alien girl began a strange journey. Not of orders, not of duty, but of something more rare. Compassion. The shelter was still dark when Jake woke up. His back ached from sleeping on the cold floor. His leg throbbed with every small movement. But the first thing he did was check if she was still alive. She was. The alien girl lay curled under his jacket, breathing softly. Her eyes were closed, but her chest rose and fell slowly. Jake let out a quiet sigh. He had half expected her to die during the night, but she hadn't. She had survived. He got up slowly and walked to the corner where the emergency rations were stored. He had found a small stash last night: dry food, 2 bottles of water, and a tiny med kit. Not enough for long, but enough for now. Jake warmed some food over a small flame and poured water into a metal cup. He brought it to her and sat down beside her again. She stirred when the smell reached her nose. Her eyes blinked open, golden and unsure. Jake smiled gently. Hungry? She looked at the food, then at him. Her hands moved slowly, reaching for the cup first. She drank carefully, then took the dry food in small bites, chewing each one like it was treasure. Jake watched her. She didn't speak, didn't even try. But there was intelligence in her eyes. She understood everything he did. She was afraid, yes, but not broken. Not yet. I should call you something, Jake said. I can't keep saying, hey you. She looked at him, but didn't reply. He tapped his chin, thinking, then smiled. Nova, he said. That's what I'll call you. It means star and you. You fell from one. Nova blinked. Her lips parted slightly, but no sound came out, still. Something shifted in her gaze. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the first hint of trust. Jake leaned back and rested against the wall. For a moment. Neither of them spoke, not a word, just silence and warmth. But that peace didn't last long. Outside, the sound of a distant engine echoed through the sky. Jake stiffened. Nova froze. He grabbed his broken rifle out of habit, even if it didn't work. It made him feel less helpless. He peeked out through a crack in the wall. 3 figures were walking across the ash plain. Human soldiers. From his own squad, Jake's heart dropped. They were scanning the area. Weapons ready. He knew what they were looking for. Survivors, but not to rescue. To clean up, to eliminate threats. Jake turned to Nova. Her eyes were wide. Again, she knew. She could feel the danger. He walked to her quickly and whispered, Listen, you need to be quiet, okay? They won't understand. They'll shoot first. She nodded, without a word. She crawled behind some broken crates. Jake covered her with a torn blanket, then limped to the door, just in time. The first soldier spotted the shelter and shouted, Hey! Movement up ahead. Seconds later, they burst through the door, guns raised, helmets scanning. Jake raised his hands slowly. Corporal Jake Moran. ID 7421, he said calmly. I survived the last assault, took shelter here. One of them lowered his gun slightly. Where's the enemy? No one here, Jake lied. Just me. They searched the room, kicked boxes, opened crates. Nova didn't make a sound. Not a breath. Jake's heart beat louder with every step they took. Finally, one soldier sighed. This place is clear. Another said, Orders are to report back if nothing's found. They turned and walked out. Jake waited until the engine faded in the distance. Then he exhaled hard and dropped to his knees. He crawled to the crates and pulled the blanket back. Nova was still there, eyes wide, lips trembling. He smiled again, weak, but real. You're safe, he said softly. For now. Nova looked at him for a long time. Then, for the first time, she spoke. Her voice was quiet, broken, but clear. Nova, she whispered, pointing to herself. Nova. Jake blinked in surprise. He hadn't expected it, but it made him smile. Wider than he had in days. Yeah, he nodded. That's you. In that burned-out shelter, a soldier and a silent alien girl formed a strange bond. She had no name, no past, no home. But now she had a voice, and someone willing to listen. And that was the beginning of something powerful, something dangerous, something human. The air was colder the next morning. A sharp wind howled across the ashes. Nova sat near the corner of the shelter, staring at the flickering flame Jake had lit with shaky hands. She didn't speak again after last night, but something had changed. Between them, Jake looked at the pad on his wrist. The signal light was blinking now. He had been located, and soon command would come, but he didn't feel relief. He felt a deep, heavy fear in his chest. He remembered the soldiers from yesterday. They were following orders, not hearts. They didn't care who Nova was. She was just another alien, a problem to remove. Jake looked at her. Nova sat quietly. Her thin fingers wrapped around a warm metal cup. She had been someone before the war. Someone important, maybe. But now, she was just a target. And he was the only thing standing between her and death. Jake stood up and started moving around the room. He checked the med kit again. Wrapped his wounded leg tighter, he grabbed some food, a half-filled bottle of water, and a map from the corner drawer. Nova watched him silently. Then she pointed to the wall and asked softly, "Go." Jake nodded. "Yes, Nova, we're going. They'll be here soon." He found an old military rover outside the shelter. It was dusty, buried under metal parts and burnt canvas. He pulled the cover off, checked the battery dead, but the backup solar cell had enough power to start the engine. The rover hummed to life. Nova flinched at the sound, but didn't run. Jake opened the back hatch and motioned for her to climb in. She obeyed quietly, curling up in the back seat. He sat down behind the wheel, took a deep breath, and started driving. They passed scorched fields, broken towers, and metal bones of fallen ships. The world looked like a graveyard. The sun was weak in the sky, hiding behind smoky clouds. Nova sat silently, but her eyes kept moving. She was memorizing everything. Every road, every shadow, as if expecting danger at every turn. Jake drove west, toward the canyon system. There was an old outpost near the cliffs. He remembered it from the first month of the war. It might still have supplies, or at least a place to hide. But halfway through the canyon path, a beep sounded on Jake's pad. He checked the screen, and his face went pale. A red signal command had tracked the rover. They knew he was on the move, and they were sending a retrieval squad. Jake cursed under his breath. Nova leaned forward. "Worried? Bad?" she asked. Jake nodded. "There. Coming for us." Nova looked at him, her eyes filled with something sharp and ancient. Not fear, not exactly. More like readiness, as if she'd been hunted before, as if she knew this feeling. Jake took a turn off the main road, heading into rougher terrain. He knew they'd follow the main trail, so he gambled on the rocky path through the cliffs. The rover shook violently over the stones. Nova held on tightly, eyes wide. Jake gritted his teeth and kept going. The cliff walls grew higher, shadows swallowing the rover. Jake slowed down, trying to stay hidden. The engine began to sputter. He slapped the dashboard. "Come on, not now." The rover stopped completely. Battery dead. They were stuck. Jake jumped out and pulled Nova out with him. "We need to move on foot," he said quickly. "They'll be here in minutes." Nova nodded and followed him without question. They climbed into a narrow passage between the rocks. It was dark, cold, and dangerous, but it was cover. It was cover. It was hope. Jake's leg hurt with every step, but he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. Suddenly, they heard it. Engines in the distance, gunfire, brief and sharp. Command had reached the rover. Jake knew they'd searched the area. He pushed Nova ahead. "Keep moving, no matter what," he whispered. They reached a small cave opening, hidden behind a thick wall of vines. Jake pulled the vines aside and pushed Nova inside, then crawled in after her. Inside, it was pitch black. They could hear footsteps above, voices echoing down the cliffs. "Clear the area," a soldier shouted. They might be hiding somewhere. Close. Nova trembled beside Jake. He placed a hand on her shoulder gently. She didn't speak, just closed her eyes. Trying to stay still, the voices came closer. Then passed, then faded. Jake exhaled slowly. They were safe, for now. He turned to Nova. "We're not going back," he said quietly. "We're not following their orders anymore." Nova looked at him, her eyes reflecting the soft light from the cumpad. "Why?" she asked softly. "Why save me?" Jake didn't answer right away. He looked out toward the light cracking through the vines and said, "Because you're the only one left who doesn't look at me like I'm a monster." In that silent cave, with death passing just inches above them, a soldier and an alien girl became something more than fugitives. They became survivors. Together, the fog was thick. So thick, it clung to Jake's face like wet cloth. He could barely see a few feet ahead. Every step echoed off invisible rocks, and his boots slipped on wet soil. He reached back, felt Nova's small hand gripping his jacket. She didn't say a word, but her presence gave him strength. They had been walking since nightfall. No map, no light, no clear path. But Jake knew where they were. The Foglands. A cursed stretch of land no soldier wanted to patrol, not because of ghosts, but because of forgotten war machine silent traps from a time before either side had rules. One wrong step could mean instant death, but it was the only place there. Pursuers wouldn't follow. Jake moved slowly. Carefully, Nova stepped when he stepped, stopped when he stopped. Her golden eyes darted across the fog, watching, alert. "We need high ground," Jake whispered. "Somewhere we can see if they're behind us." Nova nodded once. Then, surprisingly, she pointed to the left toward a narrow trail half covered in vines and mist. Jake hesitated. "Are you sure?" She said nothing, but her face was certain. Jake trusted her. He stepped onto the trail. Ducking under a fallen tree, Nova followed closely. The trail rose upward. Winding along the edge of a steep cliff, suddenly, a low metallic click echoed. Beneath his foot, Jake froze. He looked down, just barely visible through the mossa trigger plate. His heartbeat raced. "Don't move," he breathed. He slowly shifted his weight back, avoiding the plate. Nova crouched beside him and pointed. Again, there across the path, an old defense turret. Hidden behind roots and rust, Jake swallowed hard. That thing could still fire. Nova didn't blink. Instead, she reached into the moss and gently twisted a hidden rock. A soft beep sounded. The turret's light blinked red, then faded out. Deactivated. Jake stared at her in disbelief. How did you know that?" Nova looked at him, and after a pause, whispered, "My people built it." Jake was speechless. She had just saved his life again. He gave her a small smile. "You're full of surprises." They kept walking until they reached a ridge. From there, they could see across the valley. The fog moved like a slow sea, hiding shapes and shadows, but in the distance, Jake saw them 3 scout drones hovering, silent, searching. "They're here," he said quietly. Nova sat beside him, her knees pulled to her chest. Jake opened his cumpad and checked the signal. It was faint but stable, enough to call for help if help existed. He sighed. "Maybe I could fake a message." He muttered, "Say I captured an alien target. Need extraction?" Nova's head turned quickly. Her face went pale. Jake held up his hands. No. I'm not handing you over. Never. I just want them to come here. Away from us." She relaxed a little, but he could see it now how deep her fear ran. She had been betrayed before, probably more than once. Jake typed quickly, sending a false signal eastward. The bait was set. Now they had to disappear. They started down the ridge into a hollow canyon. But as they entered, Jake felt something was wrong. The air was still too still. No birds, no bugs, not even the wind. "Stop," Nova whispered, her voice shaky. Jake looked at her. Her eyes were scanning the ground. And then he saw 2 tiny holes, barely visible. arranged in a perfect grid. Mines, they were standing in a trap zone. Jake raised his foot slowly. "Back up," he whispered. But behind them, they heard a voice. "Don't move." A human. Soldiers stepped from the fog, weapon raised. 2 more followed, guns pointed, eyes cold. Jake's blood ran cold. They'd walked right into it. The bait hadn't fooled anyone they had been expected. Corporal Jake Marin, the lead soldier, said, "You are ordered to surrender." Nova pressed against Jake's back. Trembling, Jake clenched his fists. "What's the order for her?" The soldier answered without emotion. "Elimination." Jake stepped in front of Nova. "You'll have to go through me first, for a second." No one moved. Then, behind the soldiers, something unexpected happened. A loud crack, followed by a scream. One of the soldiers had stepped on a mine. The explosion rocked the canyon. Smoke and dirt filled the air. The other soldiers scattered, losing their balance. Jake didn't waste the chance. "Run!" he shouted, grabbing Nova's hand. They bolted through the smoke. Weaving between rocks and trees, bullets flew past them, but none hit. They ran until their legs burned and their lungs screamed. Finally, they collapsed in a narrow ravine, hidden. Beneath the roots of a fallen tree, Jake leaned against the ground, chest heaving. Nova clutched his sleeve tightly. Eyes wide, "We made it," he gasped. For now, Nova looked at him and whispered, "They won't stop." Jake nodded. "I know, but neither will we." The next day, the rain began. Cold. Sharp drops fell from the cloudy sky and soaked the forest. Jake and Nova sat under a thick branch, wrapped in pieces of a torn thermal blanket. Their clothes were wet, their hands stiff from cold, but they were alive. Jake coughed hard and leaned back against the tree. His wound was worse now. The bandages were soaked and the infection was spreading. Still, he tried to smile at Nova. "We're still ahead of them," he whispered. Nova didn't smile. She sat close to him. Her small hands clutched tightly around her side pouch. She had kept it hidden the whole time, even during the escape from the mines. Now, her golden eyes stared at the rain, silent. Lost in thought, Jake noticed, "You've been guarding that pouch like your life depends on it," he said gently. Nova looked at him, then slowly unzipped it. From inside, she pulled out a small, glowing cube, no larger than a pebble. It shimmered. With soft blue light, Jake stared. He'd seen something like that before. Military-grade tech. Memory chips, but not like this. "What is that?" he asked. Nova looked down at it, then whispered, "My father gave it to me," he said. "If anything happened, I must keep it safe." Jake leaned forward. "What's on it?" Nova hesitated. "Blueprints," she said. "Coordinates, secrets. Things my people were working on. Before the war," Jake's breath caught. "You're telling me that little cube might contain information that could end this war?" She nodded slowly. Jake let out a long, shaky breath that explained everything. Why her people abandoned her. Why command wanted her gone. She wasn't just a girl. She was a key, a target, a threat. Nova closed her eyes. "They said I was too weak to carry it, but my father, he believed in me." Jake looked at her. "I believe in you too," he said firmly. "You've survived fire, traps, soldiers, hunger. That's not weakness." She opened her eyes and looked at him. For a moment, something soft and sad passed between them, but their quiet moment didn't last. Jake's compad buzzed. He checked its signal, weak but steady. Something was pinging from the east. Not a soldier, not a drone, but a signal from Skyfall Base. Jake's eyes widened. "Nova," he said. "There's a place Skyfall Base. It's a neutral zone. No fighting allowed, even High Command respects it." Nova looked uncertain. "Safe?" she asked. Jake nodded. "If we can get there. We can upload the chip," Share what your father left, maybe? We can stop this madness." Nova stared at the glowing cube, then looked back at Jake. Her voice was soft, but strong. "I trust." "You," Jake smiled, then collapsed. Nova rushed to him. His face was pale, eyes fluttering. The infection had spread too far. His body was shaking, skin burning with fever. She pulled him into the shelter of the trees and covered him with the thermal blanket. Rain still fell, but she didn't care. She opened the medkit, used what little was left, antiseptic. Pain patches. Her hands were shaking, but she didn't stop. For hours, she cared for him. Spoon-fed him water, cooled his head with wet cloth. She didn't sleep. When Jake opened his eyes again, it was morning. Nova sat beside him, still holding his hand. "You stayed," he whispered. She nodded. "You stayed first." Jake smiled weakly. "We need to move soon," he said. "You have something worth killing for?" Nova held up the chip. "No," she whispered. "I have something worth living for." Jake's strength was coming back, slowly. They both knew there wasn't much time. Command would keep searching, and now Skyfall Base was their last chance. Jake pulled out the map, marked the route. It was dangerous mountains, cold valleys, patrols. But if they made it, everything could change. He looked at Nova. "Are you ready?" She nodded, and for the first time since he found her in the ashes, she smiled. Not because the danger was gone, but because she no longer had to face it alone. Asterisk snow began to fall as they reached the edge of the mountain pass. Thin flakes danced in the wind and melted as they touched the ground. Jake pulled his jacket tighter and looked down the steep path that curved between jagged rocks. At the far end, barely visible through the mist, stood a dark silhouette, a tower, Skyfall Base. Nova stood beside him, her arms crossed against the cold. Her legs still trembled from the climb, but her eyes were fixed ahead. The memory chip was hidden in the lining of her shirt now, wrapped in a cloth and tied close to her skin. "That's it," Jake said softly. "That's where we finish this." Nova looked at him. Her voice was quiet. "Will they help us?" Jake hesitated. Skyfall Base was known as a neutral ground, a forgotten facility where war didn't reach, but it was also old, barely manned. And not everyone followed the rules anymore. "I don't know," he admitted, "but it's the only place left." They started moving down the trail. Jake limped with each step, the pain in his leg returning. Nova stayed close, sometimes offering her shoulder together. They moved like two shadows against the snow. Halfway down, Jake stopped. He raised his hand. Nova froze, below them. On the lower ridge, 3 figures were walking. Soldiers. Not Skyfall guards, these wore black armor, with no symbols. Hunters, mercenaries. "They're ahead of us," Jake whispered. "They're waiting." Nova's fingers tightened around her coat. "They know." Jake nodded. "They want the chip." He looked around, searching, then spotted a narrow cave opening to the left. "Follow me," he said, pulling her toward it. They slipped into the darkness and crawled inside. The cave led to an old tunnel, likely forgotten. Jake could feel the cold stone beneath his hands. Water dripped from above, and the smell of metal filled the air. Nova looked nervous, but Jake smiled weakly. "This is our way in," he said. No guards, no eyes. They followed the tunnel until they reached a rusted hatch. Jake pushed it open with effort, and warm air touched their faces. They had reached the inner ring of Skyfall Base. The hallway was dim, lit only by flickering lights. It smelled like oil and silence. Jake leaned against the wall. Breathing hard, Nova looked at him, her eyes full of concern. "You're bleeding again," she whispered. He looked down. His bandage was soaked through. He shook his head. "No." They moved deeper into the base, passing empty rooms and abandoned terminals. Finally, they reached the command center, a wide chamber with a glowing core in the middle. A giant upload terminal, still online. Jake rushed to the console, typing with shaking fingers. Nova stood beside him, holding the chip in both hands. He looked at her. "Are you ready?" She nodded, then slowly placed the chip into the terminal. The machine beeped once, then lights flickered across the screen. Data received. A voice said, "Processing." Jake stepped back. He smiled. "It's working." But then the doors slammed open. 3 black-armored soldiers entered, rifles raised. Their leader stepped forward, visor glowing red. "You made it far," he said coldly. "But this is where it ends." Nova stepped back. Jake moved in front of her. "No," he said. "You're not taking her." The soldier raised his rifle. "Then you'll both die." The machine behind them spoke again. "Upload complete, broadcasting. 2 allied networks." The red light in the soldier's helmet blinked. He realized the message had already gone out. Too late, in rage. He fired the bullet, hit Jake in the shoulder. Spinning him backward, he crashed to the ground. Blood pouring down his arm. Nova screamed and dropped beside him. Her eyes glowed with a golden light brighter than ever before. The mercenaries stepped forward, but Nova stood up, her small body shaking. Then the air changed. A low pulse hummed from the terminal. And Nova raised her hand. The memory chip wasn't just a chip. It was connected to her alive. Her body lit up. The same blue glow flowing through her skin. The room trembled. The lights flickered. "Warning," the terminal said. "Biosignal. Defense mode activated." The soldiers froze. One stepped back. Nova looked at them not as a child, but as something more, something powerful. "Leave," she said, her voice strong. "You lost." The mercenaries turned and ran. The door slammed behind them. Nova collapsed beside Jake again. Her light fading, he reached up with his uninjured arm and touched her face. "You did it," he whispered. "You saved them." She nodded weakly. "But I don't want to save just the galaxy. I want to save you." Jake's eyes closed slowly. He was slipping into unconsciousness. But he smiled because he knew she wouldn't leave him behind. Not now, not ever. The world was quiet when Jake opened his eyes. White lights glowed above him, soft and warm. He blinked slowly. Confused, he didn't feel cold anymore. And the pain in his shoulder was just a dull ache. For a moment, he thought he was dead. Then he heard a voice, gentle and close. "You're awake." He turned his head. Nova sat beside him, her hands folded in her lap. Her clothes were clean, her hair brushed. But her eyes, those bright golden eyes, still held the same deep sadness. "And strength, where are we?" Jake asked, his voice raspy. Nova leaned closer. "You're in the Skyfall med bay," she whispered. "You've been sleeping for 3 days." Jake's mind spun. The chip. Nova nodded. "It was sent to every major command center. Your people and mine both got it. There's a ceasefire now. Talks have started." Jake let out a long breath. All they had suffered had meant something. The war wasn't over, but maybe it had slowed. He looked at Nova again. "You stayed." She looked down, of course. "You didn't leave me when I had nothing, not even legs to run, not even a voice to ask for help." Jake smiled softly. "And you had a galaxy in your pocket." They sat in silence for a while. The hum of machines filled the room, but the silence between them wasn't heavy anymore. It was warm. Later that day, Jake sat up with help from Nova and walked to the observation deck. Skyfall Base overlooked the valley below, green and untouched. Birds flew in the sky, and the snow had started to melt. Nova stood beside him, wrapped in a new coat. Soldiers passed them, but no one pointed a gun anymore. Jake leaned on the rail and asked, "What happens to you now?" Nova didn't answer at first. "I don't know," she said. "My people never wanted me back. And yours don't trust me." Jake looked at her. "But I trust you." She smiled, just a little. I know. Just then, an officer approached. Them a woman in a clean uniform with tired eyes. "Corporal Morin," she said, "you're being released from duty. Your record is complicated, but Skyfall Base has offered you sanctuary." Jake nodded slowly, and the girl. The officer looked at Nova. "She's free to stay or leave. No charges, no more hunters. She's not an enemy anymore." Jake turned to Nova. "Well?" he asked gently. "Where do you want to go?" She didn't hesitate. "With you." He raised his brows. "You sure?" Nova nodded. "You were the only one who saw me when I was covered in ash. You gave me water, food, your jacket. You never asked for anything back. You knelt down." When everyone else turned away, Jake looked away for a moment. He wasn't used to being seen like that. Not as a hero, just a human. They spent the next week recovering. Nova began learning human words better. She laughed more often, even if it was quiet. Jake taught her how to use tools. And she fixed broken things around the base with surprising skill. One day, Jake found a room filled with abandoned gear. He pulled out an old coat and handed it to Nova. "It's yours now," he said. "No more hiding behind me. You stand beside me." She held the coat like it was made of gold. Then she looked at him seriously. "Jake," she said, "why didn't you walk away?" He thought for a moment, then answered, "Because when I saw you in that ash, I didn't see an alien. I saw someone who needed someone, and I was tired of being the kind of man who looks away." Nova stepped closer. She wrapped her arms around him. Softly, silently, "I was never alone," she whispered. "Not when you were near, that night." The stars above Skyfall Base were brighter than ever. Jake and Nova sat side by side, watching. Them, no words, no plans, just peace. A soldier and a girl once left to die, now stood in the light together, not as enemies, not even as survivors, but as something stronger, hope.